After two opening rounds where everything seemed to be kicking off left, right and centre, the Japanese Grand Prix on Sunday was, well, a bit muted by comparison. The top six ended where they started, but thankfully, despite this, we still have a good number of stuff to talk about. And it seemed to be a bit of a downer because one of the big talking points going into the race was the prospect of rain, and people love it when the rain comes, because then we get things like Saubers making the top six and big teams getting calls wrong. Or in the case of Melbourne, the two leaders blowing one corner at the same time and one slipping down the order. But rain is also the great equaliser, and when it does rain we see who can and cannot keep it on the road, and people were wondering that with some rain, Red Bull might be able to pull off a win. Not that they needed the rain after all that. So what was the cause of this so-called boring race? Was it because of the lack of the rain? Well, it's more to do with the track and how close the cars were to each other. Verstappen took pole by just 0.012 of a second, which is a gap of only a few feet, maybe less. I don't know, I'm not a maths. And the top three were separated by less than a tenth, with Leclerc, Russell and co a bit further back. Basically, whoever led into turn 1 would have the advantage because of the nature of the Suzuka circuit. Now, Suzuka is a narrow track with a lot of medium speed corners. Corners where you're chucking the car in and putting a lot of load on the tyres. The sort of corners that you'd think the McLaren would love and the Red Bull would hate. But if Max had clean air at the front, he'd probably be okay. With the dirty air coming off the back of Max's car, that then hurts Lando and Ascher, and the rest of the track means that there's not enough time to get the cars close enough to get an overtake done. The track only has one DRS zone, which is unique in a way. Unique in the actual way that the DRS zone is laid out, rather than the fact that it only has one DRS zone. But we'll get to all of that in a bit because we have another talking point to cover. And even though the run from the chicane down to the first corner is flat out and you're getting up to enough speed, you've still got to be pretty close or have a significant car advantage to get past the car that's in front. And with the cars being so close in qualifying, then there wasn't going to be enough of a performance overlap between the cars for easy slam dunk overtakes to happen, which leads to the complaints that there wasn't enough overtaking. Now, some would say it should be about the quality of the overtakes rather than the quantity of the overtakes. And if you're only getting 4, 5, 7 overtakes in a Grand Prix, are you even racing? Answers on a postcard. And it's actually quite interesting. Yes, I know I'm talking about a video game here, but I raced in the VOR IndyCar League on Saturday night at Portland on iRacing. Where was the stream? Well, truth be told, I just wanted to finish the race and concentrate, and that's why I've not been doing the streams for that league recently. But that race was, to an extent, a lot like the race at Suzuka. In qualifying, the field was separated by just over a second or so, and during the race you had to rely on mistakes or by doing what I did and save a bit of extra fuel and tyres to make an overcut count. It was a frustrating race, but bloody hell, that track's fun. So you'd think then that McLaren should strategise their way to the win instead, racing smarter rather than faster. It's what I would think, it's what some of my friends on Discord would think, it's probably what you at home think. But McLaren, that's not what they thinked. Thought. Now, before people start going, "You're literally allergic to praising Max, he was the best driver at the weekend," I'm not saying that he was handed a win by McLaren wetting the bed. It helped, but it's not the only reason. Max put himself in the right position with that absolutely phenomenal lap in qualifying, and was able to do so in part due to Lando being too conservative at the chicane that lost him a bit of time. If Lando had attacked the chicane on his final qualifying lap a bit harder, I might be sat here saying, well, Lando won a pretty dull race, didn't he? So it's baffling then that McLaren decided to pit Lando on the same lap that Max came in. Yes, hindsight is always 20/20, and the McLaren pit crew was helped out by a dodgy Red Bull pit stop. So imagine then if McLaren had sent Lando out for 1 or 2 more laps, or indeed pitted him 1 lap earlier, and then utilised the faster car advantage and clean air to absolutely bomb round, they might have pulled off an undercut, or maybe an overcut, but they don't think that that would have actually happened, as Red Bull dropped the ball in the pit stop. As it was, the closest Lando got to Max all race was when he decided to partake in that little bit of rallycross on the pit lane exit. McLaren also tried to fake Red Bull with a dummy pit stop radio call, but it didn't work. With Russell pitting behind Piastri, Oscar had to go in the next lap or might have lost out. With Max pitting, McLaren had to go with him because an overcut with the way Lando had pushed the tyres in the dirty air just would not have worked. McLaren tried to get clever and creative and Red Bull punished them for it. And yes, Red Bull almost lost it in the pits with the slow stop, but they didn't. And that's what matters. It's like saying, well, Fulham had a couple of defensive howlers and conceded 2 goals to Liverpool yesterday, but Fulham scored 3 goals to Liverpool's 2. Fulham won. So there's probably another question being asked. Didn't you say in another video that Red Bull nukes its tyres? And yes, I did, and it does. But there's one critical thing to note here. While Suzuka's first sector sounds like something the Red Bull might hate, Sector 1 at the track was resurfaced, meaning that the tyre degradation was lower and McLaren lost what would be their main advantage. Andrea Stella even said that qualifying was the key factor here, because if somebody else nailed the qualifying lap and they didn't, they wouldn't be able to get out of the rabbit hole. Max was always just enough ahead that McLaren couldn't do anything about it. So McLaren had to then count on Max making a mistake. He didn't, because he's Max Verstappen. And then Max won. A lot of places are saying that Max stole a win, and I mean, they might be right, but the thing is, you have to get yourself into that position to be able to do that. The Schumacher 1996 strategy, I like to call it. Also, at the same time, trying to cover off Russell like they did was not unlike Ferrari during the 2010 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, a video that I've done in the past, where Ferrari were too focused on the one Red Bull of Webber that the other one in Vettel took the title from under Alonso's nose. And while DRS might be a slam dunk overtake at somewhere like, I don't know, Baku, Monza, China, basically places with very long straights, Suzuka is a bit like somewhere like Melbourne or Hungary or Monaco, where DRS isn't really that much of an advantage. Mark Hughes at the race said that you needed 1.4 seconds in performance advantage to be able to make the move stick into turn 1. That's huge. And earlier I described the DRS zone at Suzuka as being unique. Unique in that it's the only DRS zone on the calendar that doesn't end with a heavy braking zone. In the race you simply lift or might just use a dab of brake to get the car turned in for turn 1, and then you start slowing up for turn 2. It's a great complex and really tricky to hook up considering the narrowness of the track, and if you overcook the entry, the whole lap is ruined before it even starts when it comes to qualifying, as Oscar found out. And this is why I was asking a lot of questions when Doohan spun off there in practice and trashed his car. His plan was to go into turn 1 with the flap wide open and then do the rest of the corner on the brakes. Apparently this worked in the simulator, but, well, it didn't work in real life, did it? It's almost like simulators, consumer or F1 grade, aren't 100% realistic and will never be because of too many variables to process. But it turns out that there's no auto close on the DRS system. You think there would be for this very reason. But in a way, it kind of makes sense because of the fact that, unlike the early days of DRS in 2011 and 2012, you can only use it in the predetermined areas of the track, not wherever you want as you could in those already mentioned years. As a result of only being able to use it in the designated zones, you're going to be using it on long straights where there's no danger of spinning off. And at every single track, there's a braking zone, often very heavy, right at the end of said zone. Every track except for one. Suzuka. So at Suzuka, when you're going flat out in qualifying, you have to close the flap yourself before you start the turn-in, which in a way means you're extending the zone by another, I don't know, 150, 200 metres or so, or however long that distance between the entry to the braking zone for turn 2 is. But then I start thinking about some other bits and pieces. Firstly, is the DRS zone actually a defined length? I'm sure there is a point in the zone where activating your flap becomes impossible. And if you are able to run your flap for an extra 150, 200 metres, is that technically cheating? Secondly, was there actually any advantage to be gained from Doohan trying this? If so, is it even worth the risk of spinning if the car hits a bump in the wrong way, or if the wind gusts at just the most inopportune moment? Thirdly, how miffed was Alpine about this? Did they know that Doohan was going to try it? And if they did, shouldn't they have tried to talk him out of doing it? I mean, the size of the balls on the kid to try it probably gets it from his dad, who's a motorbike racer, but it really is one of those, if you pull it off you look like a hero moves. Was it in 2018 when the FIA decided to make the Hamilton Straight at Silverstone a DRS zone, and including Abbey all the way up to turn 3 in that DRS zone? You're just asking for a smash by doing that because you're going into Abbey and all the weight's over the front end. But weirdly, there's no actual defined rule in the rulebook that says that the DRS system must close automatically at a certain point. Maybe not call it a rule, but certainly it will do this at a certain point itself confirmation in the rules as a standardization thing that the FIA might do. The only requirements for DRS deactivation are when the driver lifts off a certain amount, which can vary from a minimum of 20% up to 100%, or hits the brakes. I guess because every DRS zone except this one ends with a braking zone, it's something that the FIA has just simply overlooked. The drivers have actually asked for something to be done about it in the wake of Do and Smash. Whether the FIA will actually bring something in, either because of technological limitations or simply because the rest of the DRS zones on the calendar are unlike Suzuka's, remains to be seen, but they might actually bring it in just as a, fail-safe, if you will. But considering that they're also going to be bringing in the X-Wings and the Y-Wings or whatever they're called for 2026, that's also something that they might look into for that particular thing that's coming in. The FIA might or might not do something about it, but they're certainly looking into it. But we had a Japanese Grand Prix with a Japanese driver. I did say Yuki would probably do a bit better than Lawson could in that Red Bull, and he did, getting the car into the second qualifying session before finishing at the back end of said qualifying session. But 15th is still better than last, I guess. And then he went on to finish 12th, which isn't bad at all. So it looks like from this one occasion, from which we will extrapolate all data as fact, Yuki can handle that diva of a Red Bull better than Lawson. How long before he gets a point? Well, comment if you want. He didn't score at his home Grand Prix, but he must have felt great after that. Oh, and there was one more thing. Sainz was fined for not showing up to observe the national anthem on time because he was, let me just check my notes here, seeing a doctor because he had stomach pains and was then fined 20 grand. 10 grand of that suspended. Look, I get that you have to respect the country that you're in and observe the national anthem and all of that, but come on! Maybe I need to create a jingle for these kinds of things. It's time for the most insane FIA decision of the week. The sun is a deadly laser. Why are we missing a driver? Oh, he got smallpox this morning. Not good enough. 20 grand fine. Hang on a minute. Wasn't smallpox eradicated? It doesn't matter. Not good enough. Get a better immune system. 20 grand. And 20 grand for you and all. McLaren will have to figure out just what the hell happened out there. But at the same time, Red Bull can find some solace that they and Max managed to tame that machine at a pretty difficult track, often labelled as a driver's track. At the same time, McLaren will have to make a decision at some point. Sure, they might win the Constructors again, all being well, despite the flexing wing ban coming in June. But at the same time, if they continue to trip up over each other because of the two drivers being incredibly competitive and both capable of winning races on their own and other stuff, if they take points off each other, then Max could win a 5th title just by mopping up the leftovers. Some of the outlets out there are already calling Max the favourite for the title, but there will be factors that will have to go in their favour. One will be the flexi wing ban affecting McLaren in a big way, and the second will be Ferrari still having their issues, which have been determined to be due to the ride heights having to be higher than they should be because of the risk of getting done for the plank like they had been in China, and McLaren's pit walls not being as well drilled as Red Bull's are. Red Bull might not be able to properly beat a McLaren on race pace at the minute, but McLaren has too many weaknesses that can be exploited, and Red Bull exploited them bigly this weekend. I'm thinking that if McLaren wants their first driver's title since 2008, they're going to have to sit Lando and Oscar down and say, I'm sorry boys, but we can only focus on one of you. One of you is going to have to be the wingman for the rest of the season because we won both championships this year, and one of them is going to be quite angry. At the same time, Red Bull has decided that the championship is a long shot, so they're just focusing on getting Max to 5 world titles. And actually, since I touched on Ferrari, I might as well have a quick addressing of things there. Like mentioned, the Ferraris have to run a higher ride height than is optimal to protect against being done for plank erosion, which, as they found out in China, is a cause for disqualification. But they are planning to bring a revised floor for the Bahrain Grand Prix this coming weekend, and that should nudge them in the right direction. Frederick Vasseur has said that the car is missing 2 to 3 tenths because of what they're having to do with the ride height and the other things they have to do to then balance out the deficiencies that come with raising that ride height, if you follow. F1 cars are designed so that everything works with everything else, so having something not right in one place messes everything else up. There was talk that this new floor that's been in the works for some time was supposed to debut at Suzuka, but it's obviously been pushed back a week. But Ferrari fans shouldn't get their hopes up, because an article in Corriere della Sera has said that the upgrade will only work beyond a nudge in the right direction if Ferrari makes improvements to everything else around it. There's also talk that it might be Ferrari's rear suspension that might be the overall issue, but we won't know much more until Bahrain to see if it's done anything, or if it's, well, made things worse. Considering how promising Ferrari looked in testing, and also with Hamilton winning the Chinese Grand Prix sprint race, there is some pace there, but Ferrari needs to find some way of unlocking it and keeping it consistent. But I guess we'll talk about that this time next week. And actually, while we're on the subject of cars and confidence in driving said cars, Antonelli had a decent turnaround between the practice and qualifying sessions as well as Max, just not to the same extent, obviously. Now, during the race, Antonelli became the youngest person to lead a Grand Prix, surpassing Max's record, and it's also a top 5 that includes Sebastian Buemi of all people. Yeah, I know. But after seeking some advice from Bottas, Antonelli managed to turn things around to score a nice points finish. And at the same time, he's doing more than enough to justify his seat. As a lot of people in the paddock have noted, he's not just young, but he's a hard worker. And he turned things around to be 6th on the grid, just 2/10 off Russell, who will be his main benchmark. And then he went on to finish just 1.5 seconds behind Russell at the end. I like this kid. Hopefully it's not a false dawn. But reading the comments online to gauge what others are saying, it seems that a few people are of the opinion that McLaren should have at least swapped the two cars over just to see what the other one could do. This is based off observations that during the race, Piastri was able to get within 0.4 of Norris, while Norris wasn't able to do the same thing against Max. Could Oscar have done the same to Max that he was able to do to the sister McLaren? Maybe. Maybe not. And if Max defended too robustly against Piastri, that could have afforded Lando an opportunity, but we never got to find out. Like mentioned, McLaren is going to have to work on the pit wall stuff to make sure that whatever advantage they have over the rest of the field is kept. This being because they have Max in close proximity and he has a higher ceiling than the other two drivers. While McLaren has the fastest car, behind them is a vulture who is ready to grab whatever they don't, and it's going to hurt McLaren in a massive way if they keep it up. At some point, like mentioned, Zach and Andrea are going to have to make a decision that one driver is not going to like. But as ever, I'd like to know what you lot think down in the comments, and you can have a little debate amongst yourselves. It's actually a triple header, so this coming weekend we're going to be in Bahrain. Well, I'm not going to be in Bahrain, but it will be the Bahrain Grand Prix, and then a week later it will be the race in Saudi Arabia. So we've got plenty to look forward to, even if the Japanese Grand Prix wasn't as exciting as the opening race of the season was, or even the previous one because of all the stuff about the disqualifications. But yeah, let me know what you think and get a conversation started. So then, a look at the weekend's early morning festivities over in Japan and my opinions on some of those things. If this thing has made you think things about the thing, then like this thing so I know I did a good thing. And for more things from the channel, click the subscribe button thing and ring the bell thing so you never miss out on anything that I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the mad lads over at Patreon who continue to support me at a more personal level, and if you want to help out with image purchasing or otherwise keeping the lights on, a link to Patreon will be in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and other bits and bobs you might want or need to know. Or the super thanks if you just want to do a one and done donation or top up my coffee cup, and memberships for Patreon without going to Patreon. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.